You are in the session here for how to implement IT security after cyber meltdown with Chris Kubeka, and help me welcome her to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for making it through Black Hat this long. I'd like to present about the Aramco 2012 attacks and the recovery efforts. Now, this talk is broken down in 4 sections. Just a light touch on what happened and focused on the business operations end of the IT and what was lost. Also, starting from basically 0 in the EMEA region outside of Saudi with my company for security, moving past the poverty line and maturing your security, and things that I could change, or if I had a hot tub time machine. So this talk doesn't really focus on just the bad news. Yes, a lot of things happened, a lot of things could have happened, but it is recoverable. Even a massive attack on a company such as Saudi Aramco, you can recover from such a thing. It almost has a Hollywood happy ending. Almost. So, what happened? How many people had heard of Saudi Aramco before the attacks? And how many people only really heard about it until after the attacks? A few more. Most people don't hear about Saudi Aramco or the Aramco family of affiliates because you see Shell gasoline stations, you see British Petroleum stations. Well, Saudi Aramco happens to have the world's largest oil reserves. You just don't happen to know it because you don't see it as a consumer. But a lot of things that you're wearing come from Saudi Aramco. They're very, very large. And a lot of people ask, why Saudi Aramco? Well, there's a lot of reasons. People like to go where the money is. There's some political reasons, some religious reasons, whatever. But unfortunately, they are an attractive target. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Islam, but when the attack occurred, it occurred during the month of Ramadan, which is very similar to the Christmas and New Year's holiday season here in the West. It's a great time to attack infrastructure. You figure half of your IT staff is gone, half of your regular staff is gone. If you have an incident, you're going to have to call all over the place to grab people off of vacation. So it happened to be timed very well for low IT security and IT staffing numbers. Now, the amount of systems that were affected, they primarily hit the Windows-based systems on the IT enterprise side. And there were over 35,000 workstations and servers where their data was either completely lost or partially wiped and corrupted, which was quite devastating for any company to go through. Imagine if you walk into work on Monday and you've got no email and no files and no nothing. And it's quite bad to lose half of your systems. What had occurred was there was a bit of malware called Shamoon. Symantec calls it W32.disktrack. Now, the best visual that I've ever found is actually from Kaspersky, and it was a bit of a 2-pronged attack. So once the spear phishing email came through, there was clicks, whatever happened. They were able to get inside an internal PC and use that as an attack proxy. Once you're in a network, most of the time you're just in because you're trusted internally. And that's how they were able to sweep out, find as many computers as possible, do whatever they needed to do, plant a logic bomb for a certain time, August 15th at 11:08 a.m. And the wiping began. So with any attack, it's very difficult to find when it exactly occurred, especially if you're dealing with wiped server logs, trying to figure out when the attack actually occurred. So there's still some mystery involving it because, well, there just isn't all the data available for you to be able to go through. So no one's completely sure the exact date that it got in. But sometime around August 15th, things started looking a little funny. 2 and 2 were put together of funniness, some paste bins, and shutdowns. And as we would say, Bob's your uncle, there's something really going on. And immediately, and I was very pleased with the reaction, Saudi Aramco and the affiliate organizations immediately did what they needed to do and disconnected from the world, because the last thing that they would want is for this to get out, because it was unknown what is going on. They also disconnected themselves from each other as a protection mechanism. And they acted extremely quickly. So, to give you an explanation, Saudi Aramco and the Aramco family, they're a production company. Just like British Petroleum, just like Shell, they make their money off of getting oil out of the ground. So most of their security budget, of course, before the attack, would be on the production side. And I think all of us are very happy that they didn't lose a drop of oil. But it also leaves you hanging with, if I put 80% of my budget on the ICS side and your IT gets pwned, well, you've got a problem. ICS and IT risk are completely opposite. It's one thing to be without your email for a day, and it's rather frustrating. It's another thing to be out without electricity, and I think I'd rather be able to turn the switch on than get my email. And a lot of IT people don't understand you can't just ask a power plant to do a quick reboot to apply a patch. And certainly this isn't how you do a hard boot of a nuclear power plant. So the risks model is completely different between IT and ICS. So of course Saudi Aramco put the majority of their budget into the area that they make money, ICS. Makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, things happened. The best quote I've ever seen about the attack is actually from the CEO of Saudi Aramco. Reminds me of an asthma commercial, I think, that still runs in the States, of being a fish out of water. You depend on IT, and you don't realize that you need it until it's gone. And here's a good example. The ICS part, it was isolated. That's fantastic. Oil kept running. Oil was flowing great. But this picture was taken and posted by a Middle Eastern journalist on September 1st, 2012. Oh, mind you, the attack occurred on August 15th. These are tanker trucks that are lined up trying to get filled with refined gasoline in Saudi. And there's miles and miles and miles of them. Now, payment systems are not put in the production line. That's on your IT enterprise side. And also, when part of your IT is knocked out, well, how do these tankers get filled? How do you know that they should be filled? Who's going to get paid? And you have no way of knowing. So 17 days after the attack, there started to be gasoline shortages around the country of Saudi Arabia. And this was moving past just an IT incident to affecting national infrastructure. What happens if you can't put gasoline in your car? It's not a pleasant situation. So another thing to stress is Saudi Aramco actually was not the only one that was affected by Shamoon. There is a Qatar national oil company called RasGas, a joint venture with Exxon. And 2 weeks after the attack with Saudi Aramco, RasGas was affected the same type of way. Now, I have read the QCERT report, and it appears to be a slight variant than what was used with Saudi Aramco. But it actually went through 2 national oil companies, which could have really affected our prices for a good deal of things. And when they isolated themselves, they also isolated themselves from things like vendor support. If you've got a production plant where Honeywell might dial in every day to fix something, tweak something, or whatever, and it's quite useful, it was cut off. If you've got an IT vendor like, I don't know, I'll take a guess, like Juniper, and they need to come in, they were cut off too. So internally, from vendors, from support, and from the outside world, Aramco and the Aramco family had to completely isolate themselves. Now, imagine what the effect on business operations as well. There were no desk phones that worked completely through. There was no email. There were some fax machines, and that was cutting-edge technology directly after the attack. So how do I come into the picture? I was phoned months after the attack in January 2013. I got this very strange phone call. I was in an airport in Istanbul, hoping that my frequent flyer card would get me in the lounge. And I got this call from a guy who said he was from Aramco. I go, oh, that's interesting. What can I do for you? And he said, listen, we're recovering from the attack, and we would like you to set up the security and network operations for the EMEA region outside of Saudi. It's a pretty nice gig. You'll be able to hire who you want, and you'll have a very nice budget. I go, well, that sounds interesting, but I actually start a job on Tuesday. Sorry, but I think you're kind of out of luck. And the recruiter was quite persuasive and said, don't say no, just say maybe. So I spoke to them because my new job, I was starting up a security network operations for the Netherlands' largest financial services company. So kind of similar, but obviously the Aramco affiliate family is much bigger scale and much bigger scale. So I said, all right, I'll take a look. I'll take a look. And as we were talking, through a few months of trying to work things out, negotiate things, and so forth, a week before I thought I was going to start, Saudi Aramco's Twitter account got compromised, which Aramco Overseas runs. So I was scrambling to assist them directly after a funeral, writing notes to help them take back their Twitter account. This was before Twitter enabled two-step verification or any real security. Luckily it worked because the moment I landed, 2 days later, I had my contract in hand and I started. Now, Aramco Overseas provides the IT infrastructure for Saudi Aramco's EMEA region outside of Saudi. We've got 60-plus offices. It could be Singapore, it could be Indonesia, it could be wherever. And before the attack, Saudi Aramco didn't think it was important to staff Aramco Overseas with IT security people. So during the attack, Aramco Overseas had 0 people on staff. And when I joined, I was the first permanent employee in IT security for Aramco Overseas. So I basically started absolutely from 0, which can be a good thing because you don't have to go and fight the old school or the folks who were there and be the new kid on the block so much. But still, it was amazing that they actually had no IT security in the EMEA region outside of Saudi. So I began recruiting, and that was probably one of the funnest things that I did. I know a lot of people think it's frustrating to find security analysts, but then again, I had an elevated budget, more than most organizations did, so I could really go out and find top talent. Now, where did I go and find these people? I hear in the news it's just so difficult, so difficult, so difficult. Some of the methods that I used to recruit were not reinventing the wheel because we didn't really have time. I used talent assessments, both on new candidates to weed some out, and also to gauge my juniors and seniors. It helped me get an additional training budget for them. I used community conferences, my network. I poached like crazy from other places and good people. And also, if you have Reddit blocked, tell your boss this is a great resource because every quarter they post for free all the top companies or little companies who want people in the NetSec hiring area. So get it unblocked. You now have some justification to watch and look at Reddit during the day. Some tools and tips for getting in good people. Good people are hard to find. Many people nowadays, they're very tool-oriented, but they don't understand what the technology is behind the tool. And you really want people that understand the technology because you can apply many tools to the same situations as long as you understand. Don't look for just the corporate image, the people who will just look good in a suit. I was able to get weird and wonderful people, Harlem Shakers, people putting videos online, dancing around, people whose hobby, including mine, is lock picking, weird and wonderful things. And you have to look past that corporate image. If they've got tattoos, if they've got a couple piercings, it can work. It can work. And also, don't always look for just certificates or just a degree. If you get somebody in for a job and they start talking about their home lab, and they're doing this at home, and they're passionate, and they get that smile on their face, that glow, those are the people that you want who will excel in your organization and will bring really good value. Another tip is I have seen some horrible security analyst schedules and network operations schedules, like 8 days on, 1.5 days off, 12-hour shifts, absolutely ridiculous. The last thing you want is people monitoring your network that are falling asleep at their monitors or who never see daylight. Don't ever schedule someone permanently on the night shift. Don't do that. It's just cruel and unusual punishment. One of the reasons why it took a while to do my contract negotiations was I wanted to make sure that I had a well-organized team that had appropriate rest schedules. So I got them to agree to put my shift workers on a 6-day on, 4-day off, average 38.5-hour work week, which meant at the end of every week, they had a long weekend, and then they would rotate. They could see daylight, mornings, afternoons, nights. And they got to see each other and got to see daylight. And they almost never took vacation because they had a long weekend at the end of every week. It was great. Fantastic, right? And when I say don't cheap out, it isn't just the base salary. I had a couple of questions about raises for my folks, but that wasn't the real concern. They wanted training. They wanted top training. They wanted to make sure that they could address today's challenges with today's education and today's skill set. And that was the biggest thing. Training budget, training budget, training budget. You don't want people monitoring your network they only know yesterday's technology, and then you've got a flood of new things. They're not going to be able to keep up. It's also going to affect their self-esteem because they're going to think that they're behind as well. So very much focus on training and development of your staff. And why I say that is they will do amazing things. Now, when you come into an organization that was focused on ICS risk, and now you suddenly have to do IT risk, I had an analyst, Alan. Alan had this great idea of how to change the security culture at Aramco Overseas. He said, how about we make people security heroes? I go, what do you mean, security heroes? And he goes, we're the scary security operations center, and people think we have a big stick, and people are afraid to talk to us. Well, what if we make ourselves approachable? What if an employee sees something and says something, they get put into a drawing where they can win a security-themed prize all the way up to an iPad every single month, and encouragement. If somebody found the Wi-Fi password crumpled up outside the building, and they won the drawing for that month, they were featured in the employee magazine, they got a certificate, their story was put in the magazine, not only what they found, but what the effect was, and what the effect could have been on the company. And those who also reported things, they were also included. And it gave us really good metrics because when a lot of people see suspicious emails coming through their corporate email, they'll just hit delete. Well, we wanted to know if there was any specific targeting or get any additional intel from that. So people started sending those emails through instead of just deleting. So we were able to build metrics. We were able to gain more intelligence because we became approachable. And your analysts, if you let them play and let them do, they will do amazing things. I had another guy, Walter, who built from the ground up a forensic system. Even incorporated it into our central antivirus so that the moment an alert came, we could pull back 5 key pieces of information and do triage immediately to see, is this a false positive, most likely yes or no. It's just an issue, we'll redo it, but it's not a security problem. And they were able to do amazing things. I allowed them about 10% of their time to do research and development and project work, from interesting logging solutions to changing the way that we We're able to do packet analysis on the network, switching from span ports to taps, making sure that we could monitor as much as possible, and testing. But your analysts and your security people, if you let them play, if they're rested and they enjoy their job, they are going to do amazing things and bring a lot of value. A full forensic setup costs a lot of money, and my guy was able to do it with about 10 hours of overtime and the rest of the time on the clock working on his project. So they will bring you amazing value. They are well worth the money. So once we were set up, I don't even want to know, well, I kind of do, but how much money was spent to set up our unit, our security unit. Well, the guys at top, obviously, they want to know if it's been good money or not. So we had, I think, 5 assessments in a 6-month time period. I thought I was going to lose my hair. I'm lucky I didn't. Nobody likes the dreaded auditors. But beforehand, I come out of Europe. We use the European simulations and exercises, and I highly recommend these or anything similar. They have 26 different exercises, a teacher and a student with VMs fully complete. Everything from recruiting staff, setting up contacts with law enforcement, handling critical infrastructure issues, contacting your certs. It is invaluable, and it's free, absolutely free, and they take tons of feedback. And I know there are some DHS, ICS cert resources like that as well, and on the regular IT cert, but this is actually the best one I found. So we went through some of these, and some before, lots more afterwards, because of course, auditors and assessors, well, they always tell you your baby's ugly, but it also gives you a way to get even more budget for the areas that you may or may not have been deficient in. Now, one of the things that occurred was after we were set up, we became, instead of, I love the new acronym, SNOC, but more than the Security and Network Operations Center, we became the security unit. Suddenly, not just guys on shift, but guys running projects with the business. And I had kind of anticipated that, but I didn't think it was going to come so quickly. And it was a good thing because many times your analysts who are monitoring your network, they don't know much about the business, they just see the packets. So we were able to get more integrated with them and know what was more normal, what should be, what shouldn't be, and to also come up with new and inventive ways to help out those business units. And we also began to build a real computer emergency response team. We're in the process of using the trademark from Carnegie Mellon. And you have to involve more than your IT staff or your IS staff. It's actually a team effort. We involved PR because the last thing you want to do is be Tony Hayward, the BP CEO at the time of the BP disaster, having a gotcha from the press of, I just want my life back. Need to involve PR. What if your contracts can't be fulfilled because you've had an incident and there's a delay? Involve your legal. If you don't have internal, involve your external resources. But when you have an incident, it is really helpful because there's going to be mass chaos. You don't know what's going on. Your communications might be down. And if you're trying to scramble and find people during an incident, it's going to cost a heck of a lot of money to try to recover if you even can. So try to plan ahead a little bit. Now, lessons learned internally. I had never seen a cyber attack like what happened with Saudi Aramco. My former manager, he showed me a picture of himself before the attack. And he had a full head of hair, and it was black. And when I met him, he was follically challenged, and it was white. So the stress, not just on the IT staff around the world, the employees, they didn't know what to do. It was like attacking the Aramco family, like if somebody broke into your house. And they didn't trust computers. They were actually, I believe, psychologically affected to the point of like PTSD from this, because here's something that they knew, and it was nothing anymore. They had no more trust. It was compromised. They didn't know what was going on. So, unfortunately, because of that, we did have some setbacks. I got a phone call one morning from a vendor going, "What can we do to help? You're under attack again." We are? I didn't know we were. So I started calling around, and one of my guys, or one of the guys out of the US, are like, "Look at Twitter." And I go, "What do you mean, look at Twitter?" And unfortunately, because of the panic, because of the psychological damage of the attack, some employees in Saudi Aramco, decided taking pictures of their computers that they couldn't log on, posting it on Twitter, and saying, "We're under attack again. We're under attack." That was a bit unfortunate, a bit scary, but you also have to learn from those things. And I also highly recommend a good social media policy and to tell your employees, you know what, if we get under attack, firstly, don't take pictures of your computer. Please don't do that. Secondly, talk to a central area first to ask questions, but don't talk to the public. Don't talk to the press, please. But just try to get control of it beforehand, and it'll have very positive results. So another thing I learned was, unfortunately, due to the distrust of the IT systems after the attack, everything had to be under super uber strict security controls. A simple website change could take 3 months to get approved. And that's when you're dealing with the business unit. So even though we were trying to be approachable, we ended up being the difficult stare at the sun to try to log in. You're never going to get your website changed. So it was a challenge. We were able to work through it as much as possible, but as far as I'm aware, it's still a challenge because it was quite a devastating, horrible, stressful, awful attack. So of course there's going to be additional distrust in the IT systems. So I like this movie, The Hot Tub Time Machine. I don't know why. But there are a few things that I learned that I will take back and incorporate in myself for any other job or any other consulting gig that I ever do. And some of these things were, we became the security unit. I had 10 guys on a 24/7 shift who were also helping to run projects, helping to run the pen testing or the vulnerability management, while also answering alerts. So it became very problematic. And there are some cultural differences between, especially Northern Europe and the Middle East, where you can't... I'm a direct person. I don't know if it's because of my former military. I don't know if it's because I'm very much integrated into the Netherlands and we're known as very direct people. But communicating to the Middle East, especially Saudi, you can't just say, "Could you please respond to my email?" It is, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing? How's your wife? How's your kids?" How's 20 minutes worth of information that is completely non-work related just to get you to look at my email. And that is very difficult for someone like me. So I didn't really do my homework as much as I should have, and I should have really worked on my communications as well as the rest of my team, because most of us are very direct. We'll just go, "Hey, we need this." "No, that's not correct." "Hey, come on." They're not used to that. So you live, you learn. And another thing about specifically Saudi business culture differentiates itself from the rest of the Middle East, that you really have to know somebody for 20 years before you get on a first-name basis with them. And that became problematic because we wanted to mature our intelligence. We wanted to go, and we were moving more and more towards that proactive response. You don't want to just be reactive. You don't want to always be putting out fires. You want to be able to get information as it's coming down. So we began to talk to other national level certs and some other peer companies. And we're like, "Great, we'd be willing to share information, but can you tell us a little bit about the attack?" "Well, it happened on August 15th. They're like, "Well, we don't have much information for you. Thank you, goodbye." So that was difficult. It was a challenge, and it was very much a challenge to try to communicate upwards to go, "Listen, if we want to be proactive, we're going to have to change this a little bit." And it's a really big change. So that was one of the more challenging things I had. But at the same time, we were able to do what we needed to do. So in conclusion, as I've tried to save some time for a few questions, yes, they did experience a very devastating attack, mostly on their business operations. I mean, no email for months, and that sucks. Fax machines. Don't even know where to buy a fax machine in Amsterdam. But it is recoverable. If you plan ahead a little bit, just a little bit, the cost to recover from an attack is going to be a lot less. You can change people. You can change the security culture. It might take some time. It might take some budget. It might take some effort. But you can, and it is possible. And always try to incorporate those past experiences. And a lot of people, when it comes to the lessons learned from an incident, that's probably the worst part of the incident handling because it's rarely ever done correctly. Try to do that, even with your minor incidents, and see how it affects things and incorporate it in. So you can recover. But also, if you think that you're impervious to an attack, this affected the most valuable company in the world. It's worth, per Wikipedia several years ago, over $10 trillion. The country of India announced a couple of weeks ago that they want to hike up their economy to be $2 trillion. So if you think that you won't get attacked, or you're not an attractive target, or, we're impervious. This was the most valuable company who got knocked down temporarily. And because it's the most valuable company, it's probably the only company that would have been able to recover in the way that it did. When the attack occurred and it wiped the hard drives and wiped the data, they needed hard drives immediately. And Saudi Aramco owns the largest private fleet of aircraft. They even have 4 airports in the United States dedicated to themselves. At the time, Southeast Asia had just recovered from some floods and a natural disaster. So Saudi Aramco said, we need a lot of hard drives. We need a whole lot of hard drives. I spoke to a coworker about it, and he said he had never seen so many zeros on paper in real life. And they flew their private fleet of aircraft to pick up those hard drives from the production floor. So if you bought a computer or a hard drive from September 2012 until about January 2013, you actually paid a small tax because Saudi Aramco hiked up the price of the hard drives because they needed to recover immediately. But at the same time, it's a really big company, 25% of the world's energy. They needed to recover quickly. So you can recover, but try to plan ahead because it'll be a lot less costly. I don't know exactly how much it costs to recover, but I was speaking to some folks who initially responded to the incident as outside consultants yesterday, and we were thinking even above the Powerball what it costs to recover. Maybe $500 million. So you can recover, but try to plan ahead because unless you're Saudi Aramco, you might not. One thing I want to do before I conclude is thank the IT and ICS staff, both at Saudi Aramco, Aramco Services Company, and Aramco Overseas. They did an amazing job responding to the incident. They did fantastic work isolating, recovering, bringing things back up, and they continue to do so. And without them and their teamwork, recovery would not have been possible. So I've got a few moments for questions if anybody has questions. Thank you very much. Got one question here. Actually, there was one security operations center in Saudi, but there was not one in the rest of the EMEA region or for North America at the time of the attack. There was just the one SOC over in Saudi at the time. So suddenly, SOCs had to be set up in their major areas around the world to recover and make sure that the moment that they connected, that they were secure, because they did not want to reconnect and then get hit again. That was the last thing they wanted to do. Any more questions? I'm having a hard time seeing
I'm right
the
here.
lights.
I have a question. What would, with an unlimited budget, you can do unlimited things. What advice would you give to the other 99% of companies who could not recover to this extent, perhaps collaborating in a joint venture versus trying to do it all alone?
I would say collaborate in a joint venture. I mean, if you have a lot of small companies in the same type of market, I would say collaborate, absolutely. Then you can leverage each other's talents and work a bit more as a team. We had situations such as Op Petrol from Anonymous that would announce things against oil and gas companies. So we wanted to make sure that we collaborated with some of our peers. And are you getting a knock on your door yet? Is there anybody scanning you in a weird way? What's going on? What do you think about this post? You do have to collaborate with your peers, and it is a really good way to save on your IT security budget. Another question.
So I was wondering if you attempted to bring in anybody from already inside Aramco, from any of the server administration staff into the security world, and whether you had any success or failure with that.
Yes. So a lot of people were pulled from IT and went over to IT security. And there was some success, some not. It's a different mindset going from servers and infrastructure administration to that weird, somewhat illogical way that security analysts will think. And you also have to have that tinge of evilness of a little bit of gray hat, because you have to kind of understand how somebody would take advantage of a situation. So you can have success with regular IT staff as long as they're slightly evil, if that answers your question. Oh, one question right here. Hold on. They needed to recover as quickly as possible, so it was less time consuming to get a whole bunch of hard drives and then also try to recover the data as they were going forward. But they needed to get set up as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Next question?
Hi. I'm sure there's some details you can't share, but could you be more specific about the type of people you recruited, the size of the team, and then also, I understand it's kind of a triage situation, but did you focus on processes first, then tools? You probably didn't have time to do a whole risk assessment and the normal. Thanks.
Well, it's a continuous risk assessment. And the type of people that we recruited were weird and wonderful people. They could have an MBA. They could have a PhD in intrusion detection. They could have absolutely no degree, but have some amazing work online and a GitHub account, which if you have an interviewee with a GitHub account, take a look. We recruited a lot of staff, probably within my team there was at least 11, and in the other teams there's probably plus 20 that were added. So I hope that answered your question. I can barely see.
Right here.
Yes.
Over here, yeah. Hi. So I was just curious, I think you mentioned that you recruited your security team from zero. Was there existing IT staff already on site? And if there was there any investigation or any look into a possibility of any sort of an inside job? Did you guys look into that at all, or kind of just accept everyone and kind of move forward?
Well, that would have been handled by Saudi Aramco, since the majority of the attack hit there. There were a couple of existing IT staff members at Aramco overseas. They had been there for a very long time and lost a lot of hair, but they didn't have the type of access that it would have taken to do this type of attack over in Saudi Arabia. So I know a lot of things were looked at, but unfortunately I can't really go into much more detail because things are still under investigation by the Saudi Arabian government.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Would you expect that sort of a piece to be a part of, I mean, this situation is fairly unique in that you came in with a zero some game to begin with, zero, right? Carte blanche. So is there any strategy around that when you are attacked and you look at that recovery? Is there a process or a procedure in place of how do you kind of make sure that everyone on the team is clean, if that makes sense?
Well, we did extensive background checks on folks, quite extensive, and actually above beyond what you would just get your regular background check company. We also did legal, taking a look at their online presence, if there were any suspicious posts in suspect criminal hacker areas. So we tried to take a very, very deep look at people. But at the same time, we also had to get staff who also did belong to some of those groups to get the information from those groups as well. So it's a kind of a fine line, but you can kind of tell pretty instantly how a person will be. I had one interviewee that came in and we asked him, why would you like to work for Ramco Overseas Security Operations Center? And he said, well, if I'm a member of the IS staff, that means that I can get access to the CEO's schedule in Saudi. We said, thank you very much for coming. Goodbye now. So you do have to be careful, but taking a deep look and also their attitude, watching them when they start, seeing how they work, seeing what access and things that they try to look at, and keeping a tight leash on them for at least 1 to 2 months, maybe even longer, just to make sure. But you do have to be careful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
You mentioned during your talk the sensitivities to cultural differences, and you mentioned that specifically at the end, and relationships and the time it needs to cultivate in order to really get access. Can you speak more to any potential issues relating to gender that you specifically had? As you're direct, Chris, right? So you're an accomplished woman with a lot of experience, very capable and direct, as you self-described. How was that taken to, and were there issues with that? And if you were to give advice to anybody else who was dealing with these countries in this region and these types of incidents, what advice would that be?
Well, when I first got the phone call, as you notice, I go by Chris instead of Christina. I asked the gentleman.
Was that on purpose, by the way?
Well, I just got used to it. And then also, when I was aircrew, it was the only way that I could put my name on my badge because my name is Cristina Kubeka de Medina. And imagine putting that on an aircrew badge. So I started getting known by Chris. And I asked the gentleman, they do know I'm a woman, right? I mean, I go by Chris, and I only have a couple of photographs of me, one with short hair, but they do know I'm a woman, right? And they go, yeah, absolutely. The question didn't come up. So, of course, there's challenges whenever you're a little different, but you get that anywhere. Their focus was to try to find the best people, not gender. We had an international team. They weren't even concerned with that. They wanted the best people. So gender didn't come into it. If that answers your question.
Thanks, yep.
Any other questions? Oh, there we go. See you a little better.
Not sure if you're able to disclose this information or not, but I was just wondering if during this particular experience or any of your other experiences, was there any sort of interaction, cooperation, however you want to call it, with government? And if so, was that helpful, a hindrance, somewhere in the middle? Just curious.
There was a bit of a hindrance when Ramco Overseas initially contacted the Dutch National CERT. They're called NCIS, I believe. All these lovely acronyms in IT. The Dutch CERT unfortunately had to turn them away because they were only set up for government and military, but not for private sector to the size of Aramco Overseas, even for private energy companies. Unfortunately, that's still the case. The Dutch CERT is a little behind. So they were completely unable to help us. And that was a shame. So a whole bunch of external security consultants from around the world had to assist. That answers your question.
Just a quick follow-up. Was that unique to... I was kind of asking that question under the assumption that Aramco might have some type of state sponsored investment in the company. So maybe I was wrong with that. But have you been involved in experiences with a company that is owned by the government or has a heavily investment by the government that did or didn't allow you to respond to an incident as you would have hoped?
Yes, actually, Aramco Overseas Company is wholly owned by Saudi Aramco, which is owned by the Saudi Arabian government. Now, I did find some difficulties, even though I am an American citizen, discussing things with, say, DHS, ICS CERT. That did pose a difficulty. And so we instead tried to leverage that and leaned more closely on our American affiliates to try to get those relationships going. But it was difficult because it's a Saudi Arabian government-owned company. And some countries and organizations might not want to talk to you or might not be able to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Hi. What kind of my question? I have two questions. My first question is, what kind of advice you would like to give the students? Like, I'm a student who wants to pursue their career in IT security. And my second question is, when attacks has been done, as you mentioned, the company is almost broken. In that kind of situation, what is your first advice to recover? Like, what is the first attempt as an employee, as a university student, or any sector we work? What should we do?
The first question is, as a student, build a home lab and start exploring. There are a lot of free resources and places and websites that specifically say, try to hack me. Try to look at these vulnerabilities. Use this free vulnerability scanner. Start building out things at home. My presentation laptop, when you see me step off the stage, it's about that big, because it fits a lot of memory, and I have actually an entire isolated malware lab running on it anytime I want. And do what you want to do at home and start learning hands-on, because in the university setting it's entirely too theoretical. It's not applied. And start doing it while you're studying, and you'll learn a lot. I also recommend, a friend of mine just came out with a really good book, Georgia Wieldman. And if you read her book, it's basically how to be a penetration tester, but it has all of the VMs, well, not the VMs, but it'll tell you how to set up the VMs, whether you want to lean more towards vulnerability assessment, pen testing, or just seeing how it works. It's a step-by-step guide. So I highly recommend that. As in terms of the recovery, I would say probably the first thing that you would want to do is, if you're under a massive attack, communicate with your employees, or in this case at a university, your students, to say, we recognize something's wrong. We might not, hold on a moment. We will get back with you once we know more. We do know something's going on. Here is an office or a place where you can ask questions, but keep it controlled. Controlled communications, because if you don't, you're going to have one person saying another thing and a Twitter person saying another thing. But that's the first thing, is to kind of coordinate communications and let people know, we know something's going on. Don't panic. Just contact us for questions. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. The question was, did we have to make social media policies whilst the attack was going on? No, the social media policies came a bit after. I mean, there were some existing ones, but obviously they had to be retuned to situations such as, let's take pictures of our computers and put it on Twitter. So we had to constantly retune them, but you have to do that for any time something new comes up. So, any further questions?
Yes. As you made the transition from Security and Network Operations Center into a full security unit, did you rotate personnel between your analyst group and your engineering group that was working with other business units, and did you find value from that?
Yeah, we did do a lot of what we call shoulder surfing. So we would sit next to those business units to see what they were doing, how they were doing it. and figure out ways that we could actually enable their business, because we turned into the no group, which we didn't want to do. We wanted the business to go, but we had to be able to turn things on in a secure manner. So we did put people with those business units side by side to go, okay, show me how you work today, and let me see what I can do to make it better. And it was extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So having had this experience and being able to go ahead and tell other companies, look what's happened and you're not too big to blow up, do you still fight every time you see a new customer and you say this is going to be the bill? Are you still fighting with them?
Yes, but I also think it's a bit of terminology. I think we need to step away from the word security and talk about risk, because executives understand risk, management understand risk. So instead of a security operations center, I would say the risk mitigation and protection center, because that would actually be easier to understand. And if we talk in their language, they're going to understand us, and we're going to be able to understand them maybe eventually. But we need to speak the same types of terms with them. It's a different world. Are there any other questions? No? Alrighty then. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And have a great day.